As we prepare for Denise D'Ascenzo's public memorial on Wednesday, we've been going through some old video in our archives. And this piece you're about to see was from the spring of 1990, 30 years ago, from a special we called Save the Sound.
Every spring, thousands of migrant shorebirds make their way back to familiar ground along Connecticut's shoreline. For some species, it's a stop along their long migratory route, but for others, it's home. Here on Shimmon Island, part of the McKinney National Wildlife Refuge, you'll find the largest colonial nesting population of herons in the Northeast.
No other place like this in Connecticut, certainly no other place like this in western Long Island Sound. This is one very unique piece of wildlife real estate.
They used to call it Shimmon by the Sea in the early 1900s. Back then, the 70-acre island was a summer resort, but after the Depression, activity on the island came to a standstill, and it was abandoned. Over time, it grew back to its natural state, and decades later became part of the first national wildlife refuge in Connecticut.
The beauty of getting this island set up as a national wildlife refuge wasn't a fight. In fact, it turned out to be such an easy coast that it was one of the fastest wildlife refuges as far as time frame is concerned that was ever set up.
In what usually takes years, the island received national refuge status in months. Shimmon Island had been earmarked for development, complete with harbors, condos, and even helipads for New York City commuters. But in the end, the owner of the island took a considerable loss, and the developers turned their appetites elsewhere.
Whether you're a clam digger, a sailor, a boater, a fisherman, I think islands like this that attract wildlife, the wildlife that's here, especially the birds, tend to animate our lives. And they tend to give enjoyment to everybody, no matter who uses the sound. Okay, right here, Denise, you see this flat. This is where the herring gulls and blackback gulls nest. Beyond the flat is a row of cherry trees, and in there is where the heart of the heronry is. This is where the black-crowned night herons, snowy egrets, etc., all have their nesting colony a little later on this spring.
So anyway,
we're interested in the birds that are nesting here because they do tend to indicate the health of Long Island Sound waters. The more species diversity you have nesting here, generally the healthier your environment. People have to begin to realize what we've got available to us here and why we need to protect it.
Although preserved, the island is not pristine. Its beaches are littered with pollution that washes in every day with the tide.
We can pass laws all over the place, but it's not going to help us until people begin to realize there is some value to having a pristine, beautiful environment, and not to use the environment just to throw your beer cans or your potato chip wrappers in.
And that's where we all come in. The dichotomy that exists between man and nature on this island is a powerful one. Today, litter is the #1 threat to the tranquility of this refuge, but 40 years ago, DDT and other toxic chemicals took their toll on Connecticut's wildlife population. Back in the early 1960s, the population of the osprey, a large hawk that feeds solely on fish, significantly dropped off. The story has a happy ending, though, and the osprey are slowly returning to Connecticut.
The osprey is a very obvious success story. That bird was very much impacted by DDT. The application of DDT would get into the water system, be picked up by the fish, concentrated, and then the osprey eats fish. That's its primary source of food. And the DDT would be carried into the birds, and it affected their ability to make hard eggshells. And so their eggs would actually crack open, and the chicks would never emerge, and the eggs would be destroyed. And so the reproductive ability of the bird was essentially destroyed. And so by removing DDT from the system, the bird has been able to recover.
That thanks to a group of concerned citizens who built these platforms for the birds in Old Saybrook. It's that kind of commitment that also helped the refuge.
There are a lot of people who worked hard on this refuge, a lot of people, a lot of organizations. They all deserve a lot of credit. But I'll tell you, this is one of the few really conservation success stories that exist in Connecticut.
The refuge isn't the only environmental success story. Here in Clinton, residents and watchdog groups mobilized to save wetlands around this marina from one of the Sound's greatest enemies, development.
For a water-dependent use like boating, the coast is the only place you can do it.
Jeffrey Shapiro, owner of the Cedar Island Marina, applied for state permission to develop 16 of the 400 acres of mudflat adjacent to his marina to make way for another 400 boats.
If you remove the mudflat, all birds and all animals that depend on that mudflat will be gone.
That was the argument led by Public Defender David Kaplan, a Cedar Island resident, along with the hundreds of concerned citizens and the Connecticut Fund for the Environment. Last January, the State Department of Environmental Protection denied Shapiro permission to dredge those mudflats.
If you think of Long Island Sound ecosystem as sort of a factory, nature's factory, all of these natural areas, the upland areas, the streams flowing in, the marshes, the mudflats, they're all part of that natural factory. And if you destroy or pollute or significantly alter any of these, you're going to reduce the capacity of this factory to produce fish and wildlife.
Les Corey, director of the Nature Conservancy, a federal environmental organization, is committed to preserving natural habitats all over the world. Every year, the United States loses 500,000 acres of wetlands due to pollution and development. In Connecticut, over 50% of the salt marshes have now been wiped out.
The historical records of shorebird activity in Clinton Harbor shows that although there's an extensive flat system here, it's not a very productive one and never has been.
But the state disagreed. Shapiro's case was dismissed and is now in appeal.
We are part of the natural system, and we rely on these healthy systems for our very existence. And as we continue to destroy species and habitats, we're eroding the health of these natural systems so that ultimately the whole web of life that exists will begin to unravel.
And so continues man's arduous attempt to strike a balance with nature. With an already overdeveloped coastline and more boats on the water, one can't resist asking, is it possible?
Well, the question you're asking is paramount to the question of whether the whole planet would be better off if people weren't here. We don't really have that option.
What we find as a trend, and certainly in the Clinton issue, is that there isn't a balance. If there's a dollar vote involved, you can't put a dollar value on the enjoyment of life or on the quality of the environment.
Well, our hopes is that someday we'll be able to build more slips in Clinton Harbor and have some use of the property we bought.
Again, we'll be remembering Denise this Wednesday at 1 o'clock. Tickets to the memorial are no longer available, but we will be streaming the full service online and on Facebook. Denise certainly loved Long Island Sound. In fact, her daughter Catherine ended up studying environmental science in college. We thank you for watching Face the State on this Sunday. CBS Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley is coming up next. Have a great day, everybody.